Chapter 6: Education, Cultivation, and the Formation of Ethical Leadership Across the Lifespan. Abstract. This chapter reframes education as a lifelong ethical cultivation process rather than a system of knowledge transmission or credentialing. Building directly upon chapters 1 to 5, it argues that ethical leadership cannot be trained through competencies alone, but must be cultivated through environments that support nervous system regulation, lawful participation, consent, and nonviolence across developmental stages. Drawing on educational philosophy, trauma-informed neuroscience, leadership ethics, comparative pedagogy, public interest law, and emerging digital and AI governance, this chapter positions education as a core civic infrastructure for violence prevention and human flourishing. Ethical leadership is presented as an emergent capacity shaped over time, beginning in early caregiving systems and extending through adulthood, professional life, and institutional governance. Keywords: ethical education, leadership cultivation, trauma-informed pedagogy, lifelong learning, nonviolence, lawful authority, human flourishing. 6.1 Leadership formation begins before leadership roles. Leadership failures do not originate at moments of authority. They emerge from years of ethical conditioning. Educational systems, formal and informal, shape how individuals relate to power, consent, boundaries, error, and accountability long before leadership titles are assigned. This chapter begins from a foundational premise. Ethical leadership is cultivated, not activated. When early educational environments reward compliance over conscience, speed over regulation, and performance over reflection, they unintentionally train future leaders to bypass ethics under pressure. Chapter 5 demonstrated that violence prevention must occur upstream. Education is that upstream system. 6.2 Education as ethical infrastructure. Education functions as a hidden governance system. It teaches not only content, but norms, how authority responds to dissent, how mistakes are repaired or punished, and whether power protects dignity or demands submission. Ethical education is defined here as the structured cultivation of regulated agency, moral discernment, and lawful participation across the lifespan. This definition moves education from neutrality to responsibility. There is no ethically neutral education, only systems that consciously or unconsciously shape ethical capacity. 6.3 Cultivation versus training. Training focuses on skills and outputs. Cultivation focuses on who a person becomes under stress. Ethical leadership requires capacities, restraint, humility, consent awareness, accountability that cannot be accelerated or gamified. Leadership programs that emphasize charisma, influence, or productivity without regulation reproduce the same coercive dynamics quiet excellence seeks to prevent. Cultivation, by contrast, involves time, repetition, repair, and containment. It aligns directly with the trauma-informed and presence-based foundations established in chapters 2 and 3. 6.4 Nervous system regulation as the foundation of learning. Trauma-informed neuroscience demonstrates that learning, empathy, and ethical reasoning require physiological regulation. Chronic stress, fear-based evaluation, and surveillance-driven education dysregulate learners and distort moral development. Ethical education therefore prioritizes psychological safety without permissiveness, challenge without humiliation, and rigor without threat. This does not weaken standards. It preserves the conditions under which ethical discernment is possible. 6.5 Early childhood, caregivers, and first authority. The earliest encounters with authority occur in families and early education systems. These experiences shape lifelong expectations of power. Ethical cultivation at this stage includes respect for bodily autonomy, developmentally appropriate boundaries, correction without shaming, and modeling accountability. Caregivers and parents are the first ethical leaders children encounter. When authority is regulated and lawful, children internalize dignity and consent as norms. When authority is coercive, ethical distortion begins early. 6.6 Comparative educational frameworks. Quiet excellence does not emerge in isolation. It aligns with and diverges from established pedagogical traditions. Montessori emphasizes autonomy and intrinsic motivation, aligned with consent and dignity. Waldorf foregrounds developmental pacing, aligned with nervous system regulation. Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy centers dignity and liberation, aligned with ethical agency, but requiring clearer boundary integration. Quiet excellence synthesizes these strengths while adding explicit legal accountability and violence prevention orientation. 6.7 Adolescence, Identity, and Ethical Tension. Adolescence is marked by heightened sensitivity to injustice and hypocrisy. Systems that suppress dissent during this phase train either rebellion without responsibility or compliance without conscience. Ethical cultivation during adolescence includes structured dialogue, enforceable boundaries without humiliation, and opportunities for repair rather than permanent exclusion. These practices strengthen ethical identity while preserving accountability. Form 6.8 Higher Education and the Myth of Neutrality. Universities often claim neutrality while reproducing extractive, prestige-driven cultures. Doctoral and professional education, in particular, shape future leaders by modeling how power operates under pressure. Ethical higher education must explicitly cultivate lawful reasoning, ethical measurement, Chapter 4, and violence prevention responsibility, Chapter 5. Silence on these dimensions is not neutrality, it is abdication. 6.9 Assessment, Measurement, and Dignity. Assessment is one of education's most powerful ethical instruments. It can cultivate reflection or enforce fear. Ethical assessment separates growth from worth, allows explanation and appeal, avoids surveillance-based monitoring, and respects consent. This section directly extends Chapter 4's argument, what we measure becomes what we value. 6.10 Digital and AI Systems in Education. Digital platforms and AI tools increasingly mediate learning. Without ethical alignment, they risk encoding surveillance, coercion, and performance obsession into educational systems. Ethical digital education requires transparency, human oversight, non-punitive analytics, and alignment with cultivation rather than control. This ensures technology supports ethical development rather than undermining it. 6.11 Adult Learning, Reentry, and Restoration. Ethical cultivation does not end with formal schooling. Adults returning from justice systems, displacement, or institutional harm require education that restores agency rather than reinforces stigma. Reentry education grounded in quiet excellence emphasizes dignity, lawful accountability, and capacity rebuilding. This completes the ethical cycle of prevention, accountability, and restoration. 6.12 Economic Structures and Educational Ethics. Access to ethical cultivation is shaped by economic realities. Underfunded systems, overcrowded classrooms, and inequitable access create predictable ethical disparities. Quiet excellence requires acknowledging these structures and advocating for education as a public good, essential to violence prevention and social stability. 6.113 Conclusion, Education as the Quiet Engine of Human Flourishing. This chapter has reframed education as the lifelong cultivation of ethical leadership capacity. Quiet excellence is not taught as ideology. It is formed through environments that honor regulation, consent, lawful restraint, and dignity. Education, when aligned with these principles, becomes society's most powerful violence prevention system and its most reliable source of leaders worthy of trust.